way the pop-up project was designed, they're supposed to be at the end of the unit, the kids make a model of a plate boundary type. And we did that last year, but I wasn't very impressed with what they came up with because they had a very short amount of time. And I also was a little disappointed because I didn't have evidence that they knew all the ways that plates can interact. So in thinking about the unit this year and trying to make it more interdisciplinary, I thought it would be great to have something that has movable parts, because in earth science there's movement with these types of plate interactions. And so that made me think about pop-up books, and I had bought these pop-up books for my son that were really awesome, and I was in moving the tabs and the different things that came out as I opened the pages. It really reminded me of like volcanic explosions and subduction and earthquakes, and so I brainstormed with the other science teacher, Mr. Baudelaire, and Ms. Whitman-Allen and Ms. Montgomery, and we came up with this idea to have a joint project between STEM Foundations and science, where the kids learn the science content in our classrooms in science, and then in STEM Foundations they figure out how to make the pop-ups. So from the beginning of this project, kids were aware of the big picture. They knew at the end of this 9 weeks unit studying plate tectonics that they would be coming up with a pop-up book that somehow displayed their understanding of the way the plates move, the way they interact, what's the mechanism driving this entire motion worldwide, and what the patterns are and why things work the way they do. So as we went through each lesson, we kept a notebook, and in that notebook, on one side, we would summarize the big ideas of that lesson. And so on the right side of the notebook, every time it was the teacher input. This is the stuff that we learned as a class from that lesson. And the students' job as homework was to come up with some way of representing that content in their books.
We had at least 3, probably more meetings over the course of months developing the idea. It wasn't like grinding rocks together, it wanted to flow, it wanted to be natural. So what we ended up doing was looking at the standards, looking at the science content standards, and figuring out, okay, which ones are sort of driving principles and which ones are not necessarily unimportant but might be less than the driving principles, like convection. That's a central theme. We decided early on convection is critical. There's convection in the atmosphere, in the mantle, there's convection in so many places in science that, well, let's let them see it in earth science. So that was a really critical one. And they had to tie into 2 additional content standards, or we called them lessons in this case. Plate movements was one of them, and the volcanoes could have been another one. The actual movement of the plates, even though it's suggested in the other ones. So there was a lot of variation that the kids could show. Some of the kids wanted to do all of them, and we were like, no. When we got started, we realized that maybe we need to limit and say you can only choose 2 extra ones. Based on the theme of your book, decide which 2 those are.
The law of conservation matter, I'm just showing how everything's recycled. I'm actually going to have words on here showing where it's actually at during the stages.
Do you think that making a pop-up book is helping you learn these concepts?
Yeah, well, you already get the concepts, but then having to re-explain them, it really helps reinforce them.
The interesting thing about doing an integrated project like this where the students are bringing science content from another class is that as an art or design or problem-solving communication teacher, I don't necessarily have the science content in my background to support the students when they have science questions. So what I'm able to do is support their questions about construction.
It's really helping. It's helping me learn in a creative way, because even though it's in STEM Foundations, I'm thinking visually how the plates move and how the convection currents work as I'm making my pop-ups.
In STEM Foundations, students are going through a design process where they are, based on the lessons that they're trying to convey through their pop-up book, they are brainstorming ideas for how they can manipulate paper to create 3-dimensional interpretations of plate tectonics and various geographical elements. So they have to go through a whole design thinking process where they create prototypes, test them, refine them. So it's very related to that kind of engineering prototyping process with paper.
South America and Africa, when they were together, and Pangea. They have matching rock layers since certain types of rocks only form in certain climates. And so since they have the same climates, they have the same rock layers. And so it's part of evidence for Pangea.
This is Hawaii, and it's a hot spot. And a hot spot's created by a weak spot in the crust where magma comes up, and then it forms islands and volcanoes. And then this is going to be oceanic subduction, and it's where the ocean crust and the continental crust come together, and the ocean crust is more dense, so it goes under the continental.
Let's look at this one right here. This is Keaton. And geological content, so he has 4 lessons, and let's start with just looking at it in basic. He's got layers of the earth. He's got a nice pop-up. I love his detail.
We had to have 3 functional pop-ups that demonstrate geological content, and then paper mechanics to illustrate concepts, and that could include pull tabs, flaps, folds.
Right, he's got maps, he's got diagrams, but you don't need to make those pop-ups. So here's his convection pop-up.
He's got a consistent color palette, deliberate font choice, stylistic theme throughout, so he did a really good job with that. There's a few places where he just wrote in words, and I wish he would have been more consistent in keeping with typed text.
Right, and in terms of me, for my content, he's got, the content is required. He's got the convection, he's got plate resting on the mantle, the types of plates. He's hitting the requirements.
As you're making it, it helps you visually understand it. Like, say, you're showing how convection works when you're actually making the little rotating thingies, and the mechanics, you see how it works better than just describing it through words, like picture.
The kids are so into it, and they'll come up to you and they'll show you their book, and they're like, look at how I'm showing mountains, or look at how I'm showing a divergent plate boundary. Would this work for a mid-ocean ridge? And they're really enthusiastic about it, and overall I've been very pleased with the outcome.